the last couple of days, and they knocked out the internet there, and
Okay.
obviously that wasn't coming back this morning. So we made it back in time, obviously for services and everything. But you know,
Right.
it's nice. Greenport is great, by the way. If you haven't spent any time there,
Oh,
it's
it's
really
gorgeous.
great. Really, really great. I'm not sure. Like I'm still trying to figure it out, but there's something different about it, and yet very similar to Sag Harbor. So
You ever ride the merry-go-round out there?
no, and you know what's funny though? That merry-go-round, I feel like is one of those ones like in Central Park, that's from a particular era of carousels, and so it has. If you look at it, it reminds you almost immediately. If you've ever been to the one in Central Park, it will
Hmm.
remind you immediately. And the one that's in Brooklyn right now is actually from Idora Park, which was a place that my mom grew up going to like many, many, many years ago. So I have to
Oh,
go to it. But it's such an interesting idea, right? Who would have ever thought to put a carousel inside of a glass casing, so that normally you can access it any time. But right now, Linda, it's closed,
uh,
and I don't know whether that's just because it was closed because, or a little more likely it's closed just because right now you can't do it. So
no. Right.
so that's too bad. Hey Warren, good Shabbos.
Shabbat to you and to everybody.
Nice to see you.
Karen.
Nice to see
All
you.
right.
Very good. All right, so let me just make sure all of our streaming stuff is going. And then that looks good.
Mike is working.
Facebook, that looks good.
Yeah, it's good.
Good order.
Good.
Have
Oh
fun.
my God. I just downloaded
All
Disney.
right,
Um,
excellent.
11 people.
Marsha.
That's it. Great. Just out of curiosity, because there was a couple of snafus last week, maybe just owing to months of exhaustion. But one was the sound was off, so I think we fixed it for this week. Hopefully, it sounds okay now. Good. And that was not, by the way, on your end, as I assumed wrongly. It was a weird sort of fluke in Zoom that I had to switch the knob. The other was, did you guys get the announcement for this week?
Yeah.
Hopefully, like the reminder. But,
Yeah,
Yes.
like 5
Yes.
yeah,
minutes ago.
I learned from last week's experience, which is don't wait until 4:30 on Friday to schedule it, because when I did that, Constant Contact was down and they wouldn't let me access it, and it was a whole to do. So, in any case, we make up for our mistakes. This is a good time of year to be working on the things that we can do better. So, that's all right. So, with that in mind, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's great to see you. It's
Shabbat
great to have you here.
shalom.
It's great to have Captain Lauren here. Again, don't think me rude, but I'm going to mute you all, and we'll get you back. Don't worry, we promise. So it's great to see all of you on our Zoom. It's great to have all of our friends who are watching on YouTube or on Facebook or wherever it is that you might be watching our website. It's great to be able to celebrate Shabbat, and hard to believe that it is the end of the summer coming up, which really seems sort of hard to figure. Obviously, it's been a unusual summer in every regard, but I think this year, especially as we're kind of ending this time of year and looking towards the holidays as we always do, to not lose sight of it, to grasp onto it, to hold on to those things about the summer that always mean so much to us out here in Sag Harbor. And wherever you're watching this, that I hope that this has been a lovely week for you and a week of peace. And, as we will hear a little bit later in the service, wherever it might have been for us individually, it has been a tumultuous week, certainly in our country and in the world. So even as we are entering this space, in different places as individuals, it's important to also be aware of the fact that in addition to certainly natural disaster of hurricanes and the impacts of that, which are always devastating, but of course, again, another instance of violence and protests and violence to those protests and all of the things that have resulted from it. So there's a lot to carry into the Shabbat, and certainly we will try to talk about and process that a little bit later. But I just want to acknowledge that it's okay to come into this space feeling however you feel, and also being aware of the fact that the world around us may be asking certain things of us on an emotional and a spiritual level as well. So, one sermon is enough for every Shabbat. I don't have to give you a second one now. We're going to dive right in, and we're going to get started by lighting and blessing our Shabbat candles, which is on page 120. If you'd like to join along, please just open up your prayer books, and if you have candles, you can light along with them. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של Shabbat. Amen. So we'll turn it now over to Cantor Lauren, who will help us to open our hearts and our minds for our service tonight. Cantor Lauren, all you. I love that. That was beautiful. Thank you, Cantor. We're going to turn now in our prayer books to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat together, at the very top of the page in Hebrew. Lechu ne'anena, lechu ne'anena, lechu ne'anena l'Adonai. Lechu ne'anena, lechu ne'anena, lechu ne'anena l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzor yishenu, nekadma fanav Toda Naria Naria Letzor Yishenu Bizmirot Naria Lo Lechu ne'anena Lechu ne'anena Lechu ne'anena L'Adonai Lechu ne'anena Lechu ne'anena Lechu ne'anena L'Adonai. We turn now to page 131, beginning in the middle of the page, Shiru L'Adonai. Shiru L'Adonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru L'Adonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru L'Adonai, Baruchu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom, Yeshuato. Shiru L'Adonai Baruchu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru L'Adonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru L'Adonai Kol Haaretz, Shiru L'Adonai Baruchu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru L'Adonai Baruchu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. We turn now to page 132, the last paragraph in Hebrew at the bottom of the page, beginning with Or Zarua. Or Zarua LaTzadik Uleishrei lev simcha. Or zarua l'tzadik uleishrei lev simcha. Or zarua l'tzadik uleishrei lev simcha. Or zarua l'tzadik uleishrei turn it over to Cantor Lauren as we turn to page 134. We turn now to page 135. At the very middle of the page, Romamu. Now we'll turn to page 138 for Lecha Dodi, and a reminder we're going to do the first, second, fifth, and ninth stanzas. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad Ishmi'anu el hamiuchad Adonai echad U'shemo echad L'shem u'tiferet v'litila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha Ki mekor haberacha merosh mikedem nesucha sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri kiva orech umiuri uri shir daberi kevod Adonai alaich nigla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Bohi v'shalom ateret pala. Gam besimcha uvetzola. Toch emunei am segula. Bohi chala, bohi chala. Lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela. And we'll turn it back over to Cantor Lauren, who will lead us on page 140, Tzadik Katamar, where the Hebrew indents in the middle of the page.
Tzadik Katamar yifrach ke'erez balvanon yizkeh shetulim beveit Adonai bechatrot Eloheinu yafrichu od yenuvun beseva deshedim verananim yehu lehagid ki yashar Adonai tzuri velo avlata bo.
We'll turn now to page 144 for the Chatzi Kaddish.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash merabah Belmad yivrach yotei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dachol beit Yisrael ba'gala uvizman kariv v'imeru amen yehesh merabah mevorach le'olam ol me'almaya yitbarach ve'yishtabach bitpa'ar v'ramam v'yinaseh ve'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei gudesha berichu leila min kol birata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata tamira me'alma v'yimeru amen.
We turn now to page 146 for the Baruch Hu.
Baruchu et Adonai hamevorach
Beautiful. We turn now to page 148. We'll begin by reading together in English at the bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening.
ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב הרבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו, בשוכנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך, לעולם לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו מאורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה. מאהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד.
We turn now to page 154. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. We turn now to the top of page 157 and we read together in English. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot. That wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt. That there is a better place, a promised land. That the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness. That there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. On page 158.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני,
We turn now to page 161, very top of the page, Hashkivenu.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storm. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hashkivenu, Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkivenu leshalom. Tehamidenu, shomreinu lechaim.
Turn now to page 162. V'shameru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Einai beheini uvein bnei Yisrael oti leolam ki sheishet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim vet haaretz Uvayom Hashevim Shabbat Ma'inafash. As we turn it back over to Cantor Lauren to help us begin the Amidah together on page 164, we'll then continue silently, and as always, please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, you may be seated. we turn to page 371 to offer our healing prayer for tonight, our Misha Berach. In addition to those I'll read in a moment, we're thinking of that are in our community and connected to our community. We're, of course, also thinking of all of those who've been affected by the hurricane, and certainly all those in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which we will talk about in a moment as well. So we are holding our hearts again for those closest to us, but also those around the world who we know are in need of a little bit of that extra love and connection. But in thinking about those in our community, and as I'm reading our list to invite those of you who would like to share names in our chat to please do so, we're thinking of Steve Popkin, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Sandra Furman, Morty Lynn, Phyllis Katz, Raina Walsh, Deirdre Klein, Harav Tuvia Abraham Ben Asher Belea, Stephanie Skit, Nancy DeMatte, Andrew Lesser, Jean Ben Sadun, Gloria Tardash, Andrea Klausner, Judy Stern, Miriam Kornfield, Roz Brody, Chana Ruth Batsara, Marlise Silverberg, Louis Davidson, Susan Spruce, Vagel Tzipora Bat Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Zawicki, Idol Basha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Neil Elliott and Eileen Rosen, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kassoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, and Leah Bat Naomi. And as we think of all of those, we turn back to the cantor who's going to help us to sing Misha Berach this evening in prayers and hopes for a speedy and full recovery. Thank you, Cantor. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So as I mentioned, and I'm sure I wasn't the first to mention it to you, I'm sure all of you have been quite aware that once again this week we have seen a truly troubling experience in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which many of you, I'm sure, probably had never heard of before this week. As some of you know, I went to the University of Wisconsin. Kenosha is one of the many towns that surround Madison. So while I don't know it as well as I knew Madison, I know the area. And ultimately speaking, well, always in situations like this, details will emerge as time goes on. But one thing is, again, immediately clear, that a use of force was taken, certainly without the probable kind of cause that would be necessary. A justice was taken in the hands of an individual who should not have attempted to do so. And ultimately speaking, a person's life has been forever changed, and the family around them has been forever changed. And once again, an entire community is upended. And as a country, we are forced to consider what is our role in this? What is our consideration of what is taking place in our name? In essence, across the country, whether we live in Wisconsin, whether we live in California, whether we live in Chicago, or whether we live in Sag Harbor, that we are part of one country that has an obligation to address and to really deeply consider the state that we are currently in. I should say, when I was preparing for this Shabbat, at least when I was looking into the future, I was looking to the Shabbat actually as one of I sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but a acknowledgement of a historical event of great significance, I think, for our country, for the entire world, and certainly for those that know me and my family's history, for us as well, which was this is now the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. So as we speak, there is really a remarkably large gathering for the circumstances taking place in Washington and all over the country, in which we are acknowledging the significance of that moment in the trajectory of our country and the trajectory of rights and privileges to be fought for, and ultimately speaking to overcome the biases, the challenges, and quite frankly, I'll say the word, the racism that is directly affecting of every aspect of our country, of the lives of so many of our citizens, our brothers, our sisters, our friends, and ultimately seeing what we are experiencing is simple heartache. And what was fascinating and really very powerful to me on our call this past Monday, the third of our panels on racial justice, that both of our young commentators, our young panelists, were very clear to point out that when events like this take place and they shock the rest of us, that this has now become a commonplace expectation for them, and that it has become to the point in which it is so spiritually and emotionally exhausting that there comes a point in which one doesn't even know how to respond. Right? How many lives have to be taken? How many people have to be shot in the back? How many lives ultimately are taken away before we can really truthfully acknowledge the fact that we are living in a broken world that needs fixing? And I went to this week's portion of the Torah, and I found really some significant things that, at least to me, are a roadmap and a guidepost for how it is that we are meant to think about these issues. This week's portion, Ki Tetzei, is actually the one that contains the single most number of individual mitzvot. If you read it in a vacuum, it almost seems like for lack of a better term, a sort of going out of a business sale, in the sense that everything is just listed one after the other, right? The narrative pieces of the Torah are replaced by mitzvot, by commandments, by obligations. They range. Sometimes they are very much related to each other. Sometimes they go very far afield. Sometimes they are easy to understand, and sometimes they actually defy explanation. But one of the things that I keep coming back to as I study more and more, every year that passes, all the Torah that I go through each year, each week as we read it, is the realization that what we are talking about for our ancestors is the beginnings of the building of a just society. Right? And what does that ultimately mean? So the problem, of course, is we study the Torah justice in this day and age, and anybody who's been on our Torah study calls over the last few weeks will say, we have reached some very uncomfortable parts of the Torah. If you read this week's portion, there are going to be mitzvot and obligations that will make you very uncomfortable. I guarantee it. But ultimately speaking, what's fascinating to me is that when it comes to sort of fundamental mitzvot, ones that affect an entire society, not just the Jewish population, but everybody in the society, that these are actually the real key underpinnings of all the rest of the mitzvot. And when it comes to matters of justice, that justice is not meted out only to one group or to another, to the wealthy and not to the poor, to the women and not to the men, or the men and not to the women, to the Jews and to the strangers. That when we get to the sort of core values-based mitzvot of Judaism, there is always a designation that says that this is a law that applies not just for you. In order for it to really be just, it must apply to every single person that lives within your midst. So one of the most significant teachings of this week's portion has to do with how one treats one's hired labor, and in particular from those who themselves do not have the means by which to live on their own. In other words, that their work is what sustains them. And so the Torah, and this is the second time it repeats it, the Torah says that you must pay wages at the end of the day. You must make sure that you are treating the people who are in your care with not just a compassion, but with a justice, right? An application across the board regardless of who they are. In addition, you get a section in which we talk about the requirements of being a witness, for example, in any legal matter in Judaism, and the strict requirements that are associated with that. All of these elements are pointing towards a much larger concept of what it means to create justice in your midst. And I think that part of the challenge that we have and we are facing as a country right now, and where we really struggle to acknowledge the frailties and the failings of our system, is when we get into the mindset that this is something that affects people over there but doesn't affect me. Right? That this is not something I have experienced, therefore it must not be real. The Torah tells us that, in fact, many of our experiences in life are going to be ones that we don't actually have a good frame for. Unless we've gone through it ourselves, how are we to understand it? The rabbis understand that basically the Torah, especially when it repeats things, is making sure to emphasize that there are many aspects of our lives that we will not experience ourselves. Okay, none of us on this call were freed from Egypt as slaves, but every Shabbat we thank God for freeing our people from slavery. We ourselves don't necessarily have to be the ones experiencing it, but we have to be the ones to ensure that the justice that is the basis of our tradition, which ultimately becomes the basis actually of many legal traditions around the world, is one that applies to all. And that it is not a just system if there are some who get certain advantages and understandings and expectations, and some who do not. And ultimately speaking, regardless of your political affiliation or background, if you look at our country right now, if you honestly look at its history going back to the very beginning, I find it hard to imagine anybody trying to say that our justice system applies equally to every single person in this country. The ways in which our interactions with the law, with the legal system as a whole, are the same regardless of the color of our skin, our sex, our sexual orientation, or quite frankly, our economic standing. We are, as a country right now, in a throes of, I think, a major change, and I hope a major change in our mindset. One that pushes us to think beyond our tendency to think in siloed terms, to think in terms of only what affects me and mine and my family and my community. Ultimately speaking, we have all, whether we've done it consciously or not, we have ascribed ourselves to the basis upon which this country has been built. On law, certainly, on order, yes, but also on compassion, also on justice, also on the ideas of equality. The problem is that there is a gap between what is on the piece of paper and what we are seeing in the world around us. And that's why I believe that when we study the Torah and we realize that we're reading again a document generations old, unchanging, that it still speaks to us today because it reminds us emphatically over and over and over and over again that all of the ritual stuff is wonderful. All of the worship stuff is wonderful. All the kashrut and the Shabbos and all of that stuff is wonderful. But if we are doing all of that and we are still living in a world in which people are being treated the way that they are being treated, in which it is acceptable to shoot a person in the back 7 times and to think that that is part of the normal process of the law being meted out, I am sorry, but I think that's something that we must confront. Each and every one of us, collectively as a community, we must say out loud that this is unacceptable. And how this ties in ultimately to the history of the March on Washington is to remind ourselves that while in the Jewish community we tend to think that every one of us was involved in the civil rights movement, every one of us was on the front lines, it is the furthest thing from the truth. That yes, there were many organizations, in fact, that were started by Jews that are at the forefront of racial justice work and of social justice work in this country. But that does not mean that we are all, especially those of us who were born after the fact, to ride on those coattails, to assume that just because the work was done in the 60s and the 70s, that work is now done and we have nothing left to do, is a complete fallacy. Ultimately speaking, the requirement and the expectation is in perpetuity. Until we get this right, until we have justice that applies across the country to all in the same manner, we have significant work to do. And I will just point out, and although it actually surprised me because I didn't even know it was happening, in the New York Times, I believe it was today or in the last couple of days, was a full-page ad with 600 different Jewish organizations that all had a single message, right, in the very center of the page, that Black Lives Matter. 600 different organizations, temples, synagogues, nonprofits, 600 of them. I didn't even know that there were 600 to count. Ultimately speaking, that's not a small thing. Now, that 600 may not represent the entirety of the Jewish world. I can almost guarantee you it does not. It may not even represent the entirety of our community. But ultimately speaking, it said something very powerful to me, which is that there are many of us, many in the communities, who acknowledge that we have to be at the forefront of this. We can't be on the sidelines. We certainly can't be at the back of the line. If we're going to take this stuff seriously, we can't just focus on the stuff that makes us feel good. We can't just focus on lighting Shabbat candles. We can't just focus on the beautiful melodies of our cantor, as beautiful as they may be. Okay? Judaism is also about working each and every day to ensure that the entirety of our existence, that every human being is able to experience life with a respect, a dignity, a basic understanding that human beings may look different, act different, pray different, sound different, do different things, but that ultimately speaking, we believe that everyone is a carrier of the divine spirit, of some element of godliness in it. Obviously, I don't have all the answers. If I did, this would have been a shorter sermon for sure. But what I can say is that if we're not paying attention right now, if we're not taking this seriously, if this isn't at the forefront of our minds, if we are not reading about it every day, if we are not engaged in the work of creating racial justice in this country, then I would just simply say, please consider your position. Please consider your position. Please, if I can be helpful, if any of us can be helpful in continuing the conversation, please let me know. But ultimately speaking, I think the greatest concern that I have is what is not just an apathy towards, but actually a violent reaction to just the even simple phrase of saying Black Lives Matter. And I have seen it in Jewish communities across the country, across the world, and it is deeply troubling to me, largely because I feel very deeply that for one to say that and to study the Torah and to read a section of the Torah like this week and to say that we come out of it by saying that no, in fact, it really only applies to us. I'd like to sit down and have a conversation, to say the very least. So I hope that we can go into the rest of our experience, especially of the month of Elul, as we prepare ourselves for the high holidays, as we do our own internal work, that we remember that we're not disconnected from those around us. And I hope, as I said, that none of us can achieve the goal on our own. But I hope very much that we each can take our own little step forward in this conversation, that we can push ourselves a little bit further out of our comfort zone, that we can be willing to take on a certain amount of responsibility, even for things that we ourselves did not do, but allowed to take place in our name, and ultimately to try to create the change that we want to see in the world. If the Torah was just the Torah and it never evolved, it never had anything to do with contemporary life, we wouldn't be reading it today. The reason that we read the Torah every single year, over and over again, the same words, the same cadence, is to remind us of the stuff that's too easy to forget. This week's portion is full of those opportunities. So, in addition to whatever I've asked you to think about or to contemplate, I also would say this is a good week to read your Torah portion. Acknowledge the parts of it that are troubling, but also focus on the parts of it that are enduring. And I hope that we will all emerge out of this Shabbat with a certain energy to be getting ourselves really deeply engaged and involved in changing the world for the better. So with that, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And I will invite you now to turn back into our prayer books to page 586, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach, L'Adon HaKol, Latet Gedula Liotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoyei Ha'aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishmechot Adama, שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגור עלינו ככל המונם ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We'll now invite those who are in mourning or observing yahrzeit to please rise if you so choose. And also to invite anyone for whom is not in our community who is remembering anyone this evening to share names in the chat as well, as we first remember those in our community who have passed in recent months. Nancy Fisher, Saul Fisher, Edwin Friedman, Sandra Friedman, Lois Herr, Philip Idone, Laura Kurtz, Meyer Osofsky, Vera Shaps, Lisa Schneidman, Norma Small, and Marjorie Weinberg Berman. We also marked the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Henry Edelberg, Rose Blake, Ira Blum, Herman Brown, Lillian Daphner, David Davidson, Jesse Epstein, Helen Fagan, Tobias Fuhrer, Hazel Greenspan, Herman Halpern, Harold Heyman, Bernard Jacobs, Hyman Joseph, Molly Katzenbogen, Lawrence Kopp, Lillian Levitt, Moses Lifshitz, Jack Margulies, Minnie Mondenschein, Jenny Osofsky, Harold Pachel, Goldie Sackner, and Betsy Wolf. And we'll invite all those who are saying Kaddish this evening to join with me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. B'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim alenu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom alenu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Shabbat shalom, everyone. So it's wonderful, as I said, to see all of you, and just a few announcements before we turn it back over to Cantor Lauren to help us end our service this evening. The first is to please join us for Shabbat services tomorrow that are live streamed, again, beginning at 10 o'clock, either on Facebook, YouTube, or on our website. And also please to join us for Torah study tomorrow at noon. Just a reminder that tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock will be our last Havdalah service for the summer. So if you'd like to join with, please do. And also just a reminder that my classes will be briefly suspended just until the end of the high holidays, and then we'll resume again, perhaps taking a slightly different form. But we still have some other great things going on between now and the holidays, which I want to make sure you know about. For all those who signed up for 7 o'clock on Sunday for the virtual tour of the First Jewish Americans, which is a docent-led tour of the very cool exhibit in New York Historical Society. So you'll be getting the information on how to access that on Sunday morning. So just keep an eye out for the email that will give you the link to connect to. Again, that's this Sunday at 7 o'clock. Also, a reminder that the Social Justice Committee will have its regular meeting on Monday. Also, a reminder if anybody missed Monday evening's presentation, that's now available on our YouTube channel, and you can watch it whenever it is that you have time. Also, I believe 7 o'clock will be Myra's Musar class as well. On Thursday at 5 o'clock, we have challah making with Noel. So, Noel, you can say hello. I hope that's correct. And also, we have our Shabbat Torah study using the Torah Women's Commentary. That next Shabbat will be facilitated by a combination of Leah Oppenheimer and Ruth Joseph as well. Just a reminder to anyone who hasn't yet filled out your forms for the holidays, again, especially the one for members, to help us to get you the machzors that you need. For those of you that signed up for doing pickups, there was an email sent out today that gives the different days and times. If you didn't get it for any reason, let me know. And the idea is basically pull into the parking lot. One of our volunteers will hand you everything that you need. It is meant to be done in as safe a socially distant way as possible. Anybody who indicated that they need a home delivery, we're going to make those deliveries beginning at the end of next week and into the beginning of the following week. If anybody has any additional questions, that is what we are here for. Okay, I understand this is a new thing for a lot of us, but don't be hesitant. If you're concerned about anything, have questions about anything, please let me know. We want to make sure everybody is well taken care of for the holidays as well. And just a reminder for anyone who is a member but maybe has friends that don't yet have a place for the holidays, that they would like to join us. Our services this year are open, as they always are, to anyone who would like to join us. We just have them fill out a very, very simple form. So all that information, again, is available, I believe, already on the website. If you have any questions, please do let me know. The last thing is that I know I'm supposed to mention it. I don't know if Shelley is still on our call tonight. But there is also a recorded challah making with Margaret Bromberg from Israel, which is also available. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, please sign up for that. Again, just check your weekly calendars and your monthly calendars for all of that good stuff coming up. And lastly, of course, is to join us for our Zoom Oneg Shabbat as soon as our service is over. Okay, did I forget anything? Anybody want to add? Otherwise? I also just want to say a thank you to Janet Grossman, who very dutifully took all of the notes from our annual meeting last week, which was a marathon, to say the very least. I was truly, truly impressed with how the fact that actually everybody who signed on stayed on until almost the very, very end of it. And again, I said it then and I'll say it again. This is a remarkable congregation in that regard. Don't think that that is a usual occurrence in most synagogues. It's out of love and it's out of wanting us to be, again, in the best possible place that we can be. And so as your rabbi, I was immensely proud of that moment, as I am regularly of all of you and everything that you give to this temple. So Kathy, I see a digital hand up, so you can unmute, and that will give me a second to pour okay, I think you can go ahead, Jerry. Jerry and Kathy.
Quick question.
Yes.
I signed up for your top texts for the Wednesday thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I never got I got an email confirmation from a Google thing saying I never got an email saying for the link. I couldn't find any link. Did I screw up?
No, and the answer is no. In any of these situations, if something went wrong, it's on me, people. I am the responsible party. I will, again, this is the time of year where we have to be honest about our failings. Don't be ashamed of it. I will make sure, Kathy, to take care of you guys. It's, again, couldn't make the rabbi feel happier that not only that you tried and then it didn't work, that you still want to try and make it happen. That is a lovely and wonderful thing. So, gotcha. I got you covered. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to Cantor Lauren, who's going to give us a closing song for tonight before we do Kiddush. I really love that one. That's very nice. Put that in the repertoire, Cantor. That needs to make its return. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Again, we're going to turn to page 123. If you have wine or grape juice or something that you can make Kiddush over at home, you can join with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam morei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lemaseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikra'ei kodesh zecher litziat mitzrayim ki v'hanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta Nikol Hamim V'Shabbat Kodshecha V'Ahava Uvratzon Inchaltanu Baruch Atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. I think let's make it so you can unmute yourselves if you'd like to. Wish each other a Shabbat Shalom. And then we'll close down and go to the Oneg Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Hi, Johnny. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Warren.
Marsha, Janet.
Joel, Wednesday.
Marsha.
Hi, everybody.
Every week better and better.
Hi, Noel.
Hi, Arlene. Hi, Warren.
Arlene, you're muted. Arlene, you're muted.
Hi, Kathy.
Give it off. Arlene, you're muted.
I got it.
You got it. You got it. All right. So anyway, we'll close this down. Anybody wants to keep talking, we'll go on to the Oneg Shabbat. Join us. Otherwise, take care of yourselves. Be safe, especially with the storm tomorrow. Please be especially safe. Stay home if you can.